Hello and welcome everyone. We are so glad that you're able to join us tonight for the third in our three-part series, the Wellesley Conservation's Land Trust, Flower Power, How Native Plants Can Save Our Bugs and Birds. I'd like to thank Michael Tobin, who's been the technologic genius behind these three. He's the one that's been providing the, you probably recognize spring for the Four Seasons by Vivaldi. And he'll also be doing the Q&A sessions at the end of it. Tonight, we really have a special double header. Anne Fialkoff, who's Rethinking Yard Care Do Less and Save More. She's the project manager at Wild Seeds Project. And that's why there's a number of visitors from Maine that are on this webinar tonight. The Wild Seeds Project is in Portland, Maine. And Anna has I think several groupies up in there. And we'll also have George Carrette, who is owner and operator of EcoQuiet Lawn Care, and he's going to help us with what you can do to talk to your landscaper and what kind of yard care practices are good. We'd also like to thank an anonymous donor for support for tonight's session. The next slide shows you, as you know, this is part of Pollinate Wellesley. Pollinate Wellesley is a townwide project, and you're going to see petals to the metals coming, going around the town, taking you to different garden tours. There's going to be a milkweed sale later on. There's going to be citizen science activities, and there'll be more of that coming. So just watch the Natural Resources Commission website, website, and Wellesley Townsman, and you'll see, as you see down below, more information is available on the town's website. On the next slide, I just wanted to summarize the three lectures that we've had so far in our series. The first one was Doug Tallamy, and he gave us the reasons why native flowers can help us save our bugs and birds. The following one was Anna Sloan, and she talked about how to design a native plant garden so that it will not only look beautiful and reduce some of the messiness that happens. And tonight we're going to get, now that you know the why and the how to put it in, how do you then maintain it? And that has to do with yard care, not just care for your native plant garden, but lawn care, and how you can really benefit by doing less and saving more. So that's going to be very special tonight. On the next slide, just to remind you that these three-part series is a partnership among the Wellesley Conservation Land Trust, which is represented by myself and Michael Tobin. Sustainable Wellesley, all five of us have been working on that, as well as the Town of Wellesley's Natural Resources Council. And Besmel, I tried so hard to pronounce that right this time, Besmel Ninovic, Katie Griffith, and Raina McManus, and then Judy Barr and Michael Tobin. The next slide, just to show you that the Wellesley Conservation Land Trust is a nonprofit land trust. It's formed in 1958. We have 10 sanctuaries, 5 trails, and the last one that's noted there is place you might want to go to right now because it has its spring wildflowers out. That's Cronk's Woodlands, and that's in the College Heights area, the area that's being circled there. Easy to find, just Google Cronk's Woodland or go to our webpage and there's maps to get you there. Remember that this is funded by membership and donations. There's no taxpayer dollars involved. Tonight, in the next slide, we're going to introduce you. This one is, Michael wanted me to remind you that all of the resources, including the videotapes for the 3 of our series, as well as links, reading lists, Anna's going to mention a blog. All of that is on our website. Go to Wellesley Conservation Land Trust, go to the More menu, under Resources, Native Plants, you'll find all of the information, the videos, the recordings of the 3, and all the other things that I just mentioned. It's an incredibly rich site, and I think you'll really find, including suggested plants for people who have asked what would go well in shady areas or things like that. You'll find that there. Both crickets, very first lecture in January, as well as the 3 in this series, all at this site. Okay, now to the introduction of Anna. Anna Fialkoff is the project manager at the Wild Seed Project that is, as I said, in Portland, Maine. Most recently, she was the senior horticulturist at the Native Plant Trust Garden in the Woods here in Framingham area, where she designed and installed native plant gardens, managed interns and volunteers, and taught public ways to incorporate native plants in their own gardens. With a BA in human ecology from the College of the Atlantic and an MS in ecologic design from the Conway School, she brings with her a deep knowledge of native plant ecology, horticulture, conservation, and ecological landscape design. After Anna's talk, George will then, on the next slide, George will then describe how to talk to your lawn care professional. George Carrette is the owner and operator of the EcoQuiet Land Care. He studied horticulture at the UMass Amherst Stockbridge School of Agriculture before starting his company in 2014. He decided to address the biggest pollution generators in the industry, and that's landscape management and how to reduce pollution in taking care of your land. He has collaborated with the American Green Zone Alliance and the Quiet Communities Group, both of whom have worked diligently to inform municipalities, landscapers, and private homeowners on how to move forward using electric and eco-friendly landscaping methods. He's accredited by the American Green Zone Alliance. 2 powerful speakers with lots of experience, and it's just going to make a perfect night. So Anna, take it away. Oh, the webinar will last about 60 minutes. It's being recorded, and put any questions in the chat, and Michael will do a Q&A session afterwards. Now, Anna, take it away.
Thank you, Judy. Yeah, thank you so much for having me tonight. It's really a pleasure to be here and wonderful to hear about all the things that are going on in the town of Wellesley to promote pollinators and better yard care. So I do work at Wild Seed Project, which is a small and young growing nonprofit in Portland, Maine. So I welcome both the Massachusetts folks here tonight, as well as anyone from Maine and who heard about us from Wild Seed Project. And if you're unfamiliar with Wild Seed Project, we have several things that we do. We mainly practice education and outreach about native plants in Maine, but also beyond. Heather McCargo, our founder, really saw a need for people to understand ecological gardening and native plants in the state of Maine about 7 years ago when she started Wild Seed Project. And since then, we've really built a really solid website with so many great information, resources, and images. So I really encourage you to check that out. And we actually have a tree guide coming out this month, towards the end of this month. It's called Native Trees for Northeast Landscapes, a Wild Seed Project Guide. And it's the 7th of our annual publications. In the past, we've been doing magazines, which are really beautiful ad-free magazines with articles by horticulturists and landscape professionals that are thinking more ecologically. So, just check that out. If you get a chance, go on our website. And another thing that we are doing at Wild Seed Project is we've recently launched a program called the Pledge to Rewild. And I'll tell you a little bit about what rewilding is. It starts with thinking about native plants as the basis of our food webs. So we draw a lot of inspiration and information from much of Doug Tallamy's research. I think in the first part of the series, you saw a reprise of one of his presentations. And he's written several really great books recently. His most recent book is actually The Nature of Oaks. It just came out, I believe, this month or in April. And that goes over the ecology of oaks. But Nature's Best Hope is his second most recent book, this one right here. And our Pledge to Rewild is really modeled off of a lot of what Doug Tallamy talks about in Nature's Best Hope. Anything that you can do to restore native plants into your landscape. And we give 10 actionable steps that you can take to do that. So, recognizing native plants as the basis of our local food webs really means that there's really close integral relationships between insects and native plants, as well as many other wildlife species. And it really cascades up the food chain. So birds are heavily reliant on insects. And recently we have been seeing major declines in both our migrating bird populations as well as insects. We're kind of facing an insect Armageddon, it's called by some. And so by boosting native plants in our landscapes, we can kind of help bring those very delicate food webs back. So one thing that you can do, our first action step towards rewilding, is actually to plant native trees that support local food webs. And it's really interesting because a lot of kind of pollinator gardens recently have gotten a reputation for being these, very floriferous, sunny gardens, meadows, and those are great. But we also need native trees because they support huge quantities of caterpillars, which are really important for songbirds in spring when they're feeding their young. They create kind of a perfect protein-rich miniature sausage for the baby birds. And some of them are bigger than others. The Cecropia silk moth has a really large caterpillar that feeds on cherry leaves. So black cherry, our native black cherry, is one of its favorites, and several other species of trees. So the oaks, the willows, cherries, birches, and poplars are those top 5 trees that support the most. They're called keystone by Doug Tallamy species because while we've seen a lot of large predators considered keystone species and helping maintain balance in our ecosystems, I also think that there's huge keystone species in the plant world as well. So those are some, and it's not just trees, but trees really have the most biomass. If you think about it, they capture and store huge amounts of carbon. They soak up lots of rainwater, they shade and cool our cities. So trees are really invaluable resources for us. And starting by planting native trees is the great thing to do. So if you plant any species of oaks, native oaks, willows, cherries, birches, or poplars, that's a really good place to start, and then add in diversity around those other species. So I'm not saying that you should only plant these species, but it's a good place to start. It's kind of like the scaffolding of the landscape. So the next rewilding action step is actually to shrink your lawn. And it's really unfortunate that lawns actually have become kind of the default landscape. They do provide some function in our landscapes. They're important for recreation, gathering spaces, and they've just become kind of an American icon. If your neighbor has the greenest lawn, the most perfect lawn, you would like that too. But lawns I think they suck. They suck huge amounts of water. They're one of the most irrigated crops in the US. They use up huge amounts of fossil fuels, and we know that creates air pollution and causing climate change. People use pesticides very liberally on lawns because they're trying to keep out all the broad-leaved plants, all the plantains and clovers and things like that, so that they have a pure green monocrop lawn. They also use fertilizers to keep their lawns extremely green. And fertilizers, as well as the fossil fuels, really wash into water bodies and cause a whole host of problems. Pesticides are really detrimental to the pollinators like the moths and butterflies and bees and other insects. And that cascades up the food chain. So, these are things that we can eliminate if we shrink our lawn. Not to mention that lawn, takes a lot of energy and money and time to maintain. So if we shrink our lawns, we know we don't have to get rid of them altogether. We can keep a good portion of our lawns as places for recreation, gathering spaces, and I'd say pathways that convey us through the landscape. They're the places to walk on, essentially. But lawns, don't serve much purpose if they're kind of the default. So we can start by releasing the mower in some portions of our lawn, so that we can keep kind of we could, keep any sort of beautiful shape, so that is framed by an unmowed edge, kind of like this sort of amoeba shape here. And we can let other portions of the existing lawn go to meadow. So why mow when you can meadow? You can, there's one method is to stop mowing strategically, not necessarily altogether, but at least during the growing season, and save your mowing for late winter through early spring. And that can be a challenge based on, the wet, it's often the wet time of year. So finding the right time to mow at that point can be very challenging, but I think it depends on where you're located and your comfort level and your expertise. And so I think stopping mowing is a little bit more advanced for some people. It's one of the methods that, you have to pay attention to what's coming up after you stop mowing. So you can allow more native plants that might have been kind of in the seed bank to start repopulating those areas. But then I know a lot of the weedy species will come up too. So what do you do then? It's a process of getting to know the plants that are coming up, letting them go to flower, letting them reproduce if they're a desired native species or another desired species, and then stopping their reproduction and cutting back very persistently if they're an invasive plant or a weedy non-native plant that you don't want in your meadow. And it's not to say that you're ever going to end up with a pure meadow of native species. You have to also accept that there's going to be some kind of, European weeds like Queen Anne's lace, things like that, that are going to exist that might also provide some pollinator value too. So this is something that takes some time and a little bit of expertise. So I wouldn't recommend it to the beginner. But another method is to sheet mulch over your lawn. So this is a way of smothering the weeds and then adding organic matter to the soil and then planting into it. So sheet mulching starts with setting down cardboard. You can do a nice thick 1 or 2 layers of cardboard. And I like going to, my local grocery store or big box store and asking them for their extra cardboard boxes. But you can also buy large sheets of cardboard or use brown paper, but you just want to use extra paper to really make it a thick surface. And you want to take off the tape. Anything that is glossy you don't want to use. You just want to use the matte cardboard. And then lay down, you could use aged leaves or aged wood chips on top of that, or aged bark mulch. I think in very rare circumstances, you might need some actual soil. And that's really only if the soil is extremely depleted. And if you are trying to supplement the soil in some way. But for the most part, if you pick plants that are well suited to what you have, then you don't need to add anything extra to your soil. You can work with what you have. So, I think, 2 to 3 inches or more of wood chips or bark mulch or aged leaves is really good on top of that. So if you do that in spring and you give it the growing season to break down, then you can plant into it in the fall. And then in the fall, that's a great time to plant. I think it's an underrated time to plant. People don't think about doing that. But if you think about it, everything's cooling down, plants are slowing down their growth, and they're not needing as many inputs like water. So you can get them kind of in the ground early enough that they can start to set their roots in and not heave over the winter. Then in the spring, they're off and running and they're actually ahead of the spring planted plants. So this is actually at Nasami Farm. It's part of Native Plant Trust's Plug Nursery in Western Massachusetts in Whately, Mass. And an intern of theirs from several years ago named Shannon Dry installed a lawn alternatives bed in their parking lot island. And that included a wide range of different grass-like plants and some true grasses. So sedges like Pennsylvania sedge and Appalachian sedge, wavy hairgrass, plantain leaf pussy toes, three-toothed cinquefoil, lots of lovely plants. And if you want to learn more about ground covers and lawn alternatives, we actually do have a blog on our website all about native ground covers. So feel free to read that for more information. But lawn alternatives are a really great way to kind of replace lawn, especially if you're looking for a lawn-like look. A lot of our native lawn alternatives are not necessarily tolerant of lots of foot traffic. And so you do want to kind of research that a little bit. I'd say if you're looking for a straight up lawn replacement with something that's less consumptive of all those inputs like fertilizer and water, and mowing, then I would use a seed mix of fescues, and there's some really great places. Ecolawn.com, I believe, has a really nice seed mix for different species of fescues that are put together for a kind of eco-lawn. And they're not native grasses, but they're still a much better alternative if you're looking to replace your whole lawn. So, replacing the lawn with lawn alternatives is a great start. But I think we can take it a step further and think about replacing chunks of our lawn, portions of our lawn with layers of native vegetation. So that includes the ground covers, the more ground hugging ground covers, the ones that get a little bit taller and take up space. You have your more structural perennials that get even a little bit taller than that and might emerge out of those ground covers. You have your low shrubs and taller shrubs that can help shape the space and create maybe sound and visual buffers from the road or from your neighbors. Vines up to small trees and taller trees. So really thinking about stacking, packing, and layering all the different vertical space in your garden is a way to get in more native plant biomass to increase the opportunities for insects, birds, and other wildlife in your garden, as well as to really soak up stormwater and cool urban areas. So all of these things really work together. I really can't get away with not talking about a couple plants that are my favorite plants tonight. So one of my favorite plants is just the genus goldenrod, solidago, and euthamia. Those are the two genuses of goldenrods altogether. I love goldenrods, and they get a bad reputation because first of all, people think they cause allergies, which is not true. Goldenrods are animal pollinated, so pollinated by bees and wasps, and they're not wind pollinated. So their pollen's not airborne, it's more sticky and sticks to animals. But at the same time, there's often a lot of grasses and ragweed blooming at the same time as goldenrod later in the summer. And into fall. So that's usually what's causing the allergies. Secondly, goldenrods are thought to be extremely weedy, but there's a few species of goldenrods that kind of are truly weedy plants. They're still valuable native plants, and maybe I would put like Canada goldenrod or wrinkle leaf goldenrod into highway margins and larger meadows, but I wouldn't plant them in a garden setting because they would start to take over and just be a little too aggressive. So these are really garden worthy goldenrods. The silver rod, it's sort of more of a plant nerd's goldenrod because it's a specialty goldenrod. It's got, creamy white flowers, and instead of yellow, it's the only white blooming goldenrod. I really love gray goldenrod and downy goldenrod, which is not pictured here, but those are both petite goldenrods that don't overtop other plants and don't seed around more than a lot of, the taller goldenrods. And those are both for the sun. For the shade on the bottom half of the screen, I really love zigzag goldenrod and wreath goldenrod. Now, zigzag goldenrod can tolerate a little bit more moisture, and wreath goldenrod, I call it wreath goldenrod, some people call it blue stem goldenrod, but that can tolerate a little bit more dry. So dry shade and moist shade. And both of them have axillary flowers. So that means their flowers grow out of the point between where the leaf meets the stem. So it gives them a really beautiful kind of wreath-like appearance. They're really beautiful plants and extremely important for Lepidoptera, which are moth and butterflies whose caterpillars feed on their leaves, and for late season forage of nectar and pollen for bees and wasps. And so, when you're planting, I think it's really essential to cut out your pesticides at this next spot in your gardening, where you buy your plants. And it's really easy to kind of not even think about this, but the majority of nurseries actually use huge amounts of pesticides to grow their plants. And they're called systemic pesticides because they might spray them on the plants, but the pesticide goes into the whole vascular system of the plant and can remain there for years. So even after you bring your plant home, the systemic pesticide might be present. A lot of them, these systemic pesticides are neonicotinoids, which is a type of systemic pesticide. They might stay there for years, and so all the moth and butterfly caterpillars that are eating their leaves and any other insects and mammals that might be eating their leaves would be ingesting this pesticide. Another thing to think about when you're sourcing quality plants is to think about genetic diversity. And that means that if you have genetic diversity in your plants, then you have adaptability to drought and flooding, extremes in temperature, all the things that come with climate change. And this means that they're more resilient and they're going to have offspring that can potentially adapt to future changes as well. So finding plants that are grown from seed is a way to do that. Most plants in the nursery are actually grown from clones. So they might be grown from tissue culture, which is actually grown in a lab, or they are cuttings or, just clones from one plant to another. So essentially, like all of one species might be all one individual, like blue lobelia, even though it's a great pollinator plant, it's all oftentimes from one individual. Whereas if you grow it from seed, you have all these genetically variable plants that might have some sort of adaptability to some stressor down the road. So how to do this is tricky. I think what you need to do is first find the great nurseries that exist. We have a really great resource on our website, Where to Buy Native Plants, and we're about to update it with even more places to buy native plants and go a little bit more in depth with it. So keep an eye out for that. But I would, ask, not just go by what somebody tells you is a good nursery. Call the nurseries maybe in their off season during the winter or on rainy days when they're not so busy, and ask them if they grow their plants with pesticides, if they might consider not doing that, and if they grow their plants from seeds. A lot of the nurseries on this list do grow their plants from seeds. They're propagation nurseries, but many of them are not. So it's something to look into. And whether they have organic growing practices in general is important to ask about. So we talked about what to plant and how to kind of think about changing up your the way that your yard is set up, taking away lawn and replacing it with native plants, but how you manage your yard is really essential as well. So I would take a look at, the life cycle of this Baltimore checker spot butterfly, which is a really beautiful butterfly that's in decline, especially in the Northeast. It's kind of on the tip of its range in the Northeast, but it is in decline because it's losing habitat, and that habitat is the native host plant, Kilone glabra, or white turtlehead. And that's just because it's a plant that grows in wetlands, and a lot of those wetlands have gone under development. So that's, the biggest reason for loss of habitat is development and land degradation from invasive species coming in and pushing out native plants, from poor land use practices. So there's lots that goes into this. But so the life cycle of the checker spot butterfly is that it lays its eggs on its host plant. It has a couple host plants, not just white turtlehead, but one of its main ones is white turtlehead, on the leaves. And then those caterpillars all hatch, and they are gregarious. So they, as a group, form this webbing around them to protect them from predators, and they go to the different leaves and munch away, and then they don't pupate and become butterflies that year. They crawl down to the leaf litter and overwinter in the leaf litter. And they're still very small at that point. It's hard to see them. Then they crawl back up to the plants, and they'll maybe have a little bit a wider plant eating palate in their second year, their second growing season. But they'll munch for longer, gaining energy and strength to pupate and become butterflies. So then the cycle starts over again. So this tells us that what you plant is extremely important, but also leaving leaves is very important. So the biggest reason for decline in certain moth and butterfly species in suburban and urban areas is because of mowing and blowing, and taking away leaves, taking away the places for them to complete their life cycles, not just to forage. They also need foraging opportunities on flowers, but they need so much more. They need places to overwinter, and they need places and they need the food for their caterpillars. So if we rethink our yard cleanup, that really just gets us to switch everything around altogether. Blowing leaves, even raking them is destructive, and moving them is destructive to these creatures, but we can make some compromises. It doesn't mean we can't remove some leaves here and there. We just have to kind of think about where we do that. I think the thing that we need to realize is that leaves are really a precious and valuable resource, and taking them away in these yard cleanup bags is not something you want to do, because they make great mulch. They're really a great mulch source. They provide opportunities for lots of different creatures to overwinter and live year round in. And so I really like using leaves as mulch because they break down and they add organic matter to the soil. They retain soil moisture, and they provide those places for creatures to live. And they're a lot cheaper than buying in mulch from outside resources too. So we actually came up with this Leave the Leaves poster last fall, and this is a great thing to do if you have leaves down on your garden beds and you want your neighbors to learn about what you're doing and not just think that you're neglecting your lawn or neglecting your yard. So you can say, I'm leaving the leaves because I'm not blowing, raking, or shredding leaves this fall. I'm leaving the leaves to sustain birds. This doesn't just include leaving leaves, but I'll get to more of this later. Protect those overwintering creatures. Insulating plant roots is important because we are actually having less and less snow cover every year. So in the cold winter months, we need to actually insulate those plant roots and build living soil. And this living soil includes both for the macro creatures, the macroorganisms like frogs and bees and millipedes and salamanders, but also for for fungi. So mycorrhizal networks really benefit from leaf mulch over time, as well as some wood chip mulch, but leaf mulch is really what the forest floor is made of. Um, and then leaving other things as well is important. So you can check out more about, this on our Leave the Leaves blog post. But yard care, it comes down to balancing several different items. Pollinator value and other wildlife value is included in this is really essential. Aesthetic appeal is not something you want to lose because you want your neighbors to want to emulate what you're doing. You want them to stop and think, oh, they're doing something different, but I really like how it looks. I want to try it too. And you want your workload management to not be all in the spring because the spring is the busiest time for gardeners, as we know. So there's things to consider. One way that you can consolidate your leaves if you feel like you have too many leaves, point that I need to hit on too is that we actually, think that we have too many leaves and there's a lot of leaves to manage. But if we think about, shrinking our lawns and providing more garden space, then there's more places to put the leaves. Shrinking pavement is another good idea. So, but if you still have too many leaves because like maybe you live in an urban area and you have a large tree that drops a lot of leaves, a good thing to do is kind of make a compost pile or a composting leaf fence. And so this is a good way to block off an area and let the leaves break down. So this is coiled up chicken wire with leaves piled into it. Another thing to do that's a little bit more destructive to creatures, harmful to creatures, but is a compromise is to shred your leaves. So maybe you just clean up the leaves that fall on your lawn and the edges of your garden bed, and you can shred those and put them back into your garden beds because they'll break down pretty quickly and add organic matter to the soil. And they also add a little nice refined look. So maybe you can just mulch the edges of your garden beds and clean up the edges of your garden beds with those shredded leaves and leave the whole leaves on the interior of the garden beds. That's something that I like to do. This is me shredding them at my mom's house in Massachusetts with an electric shredder. And this is a homeowner's electric shredder. And maybe George, I don't know if you can speak more to more landscaping grade shredders, but this one works really well for a small property. And I don't know of the larger ones that work more for commercial landscaping, but maybe you can address that. So another kind of thing to think about with leaving your leaves is, I know that leaves accumulate in certain sections of your property, and then other sections of your property, they blow off and you can never keep the leaves on. So usually, if you think about it, the convex uphill parts of your property or the little niches are where the leaves don't stay on. So maybe that's a place to just give up trying to keep leaves there and plant ground covers that shouldn't get smothered by too many leaves, like phlox and pussy toes and barren strawberry, things like that. Whereas in the downhill concave portions of your property, that's where the leaves often accumulate, or against a fence or within a shrub. And those are the places that you might need to remove some excess leaves. Removing them maybe in the spring, taking them out of the shrubs so that you can get more airflow into the base of the shrubs. But another thing you can do is plant more strong stemmed plants that can emerge up through the leaves. So things like sunflowers and bugbanes, actaeas, blue cohosh, a lot of ferns are very strong stemmed plants, and those can get through nice thick layers of leaves. But plants emerge through whole leaves with no problem. It's kind of a myth that they don't. So shredding your leaves is really just for aesthetics for the most part, and it helps break them down faster. But sometimes you don't want them to break down too fast because then you're left with no mulch in the middle of the growing season. And with a lot of the invasive worms that we actually have leaves breaking down too quickly in a lot of our suburban areas. So even the most delicate plants like spring beauties can emerge up through a thick layer of leaves, at least 4 to 6 inches thick. And we want to leave fallen sticks. Those are places for lots of the decay, lots of decay and the organisms that break things down to thrive. It's for salamanders to thrive underneath, things like that. And maybe instead of leaving them, you can clean them up by rearranging them, just not cleaning them up too much. This is Hidden Valley, the sculpture at Garden in the Woods. And it's a really nice demonstration of what to do with fallen logs. And you can use it on a smaller scale with sticks, making these nice little stick piles, or you can make a wattle fence. Leaving standing vegetation through the winter is really important for birds, especially, and other creatures that might find cover and forage. So coneflowers, anything with seed heads, grasses, are really important to leave up. And you can think about leaving, maybe if you have a meadow or a garden bed, maybe half of your garden bed or meadow, leave it up throughout the growing season and through the whole year, and then mow the other half or cut back the other half, just so that you have something for the pollinators. Or maybe you cut back just the weak stemmed plants that have fallen to the ground and leave up the nice, strong structural plants. You can make compromises where you need to. Plant pithy stemmed plants or hollow stemmed plants. Those are places that provide chambers for native bees to lay eggs in and overwinter in. So those are plants like flowering raspberry and Joe Pyeweed and common elderberry. And there's many more plants that do that too. I'd encourage you to take a look at Heather Holmes' website, pollinatorsnativeplants.com, because she is a really great resource. And she has lots of infographics and posters that are really helpful. But she encourages people to cut back native plants in the spring, the dead stems, but leave them at varying heights, about 8 to 24 inches. And so the new vegetation that comes up, say in a coneflower, will cover up those cut stems and you won't see them by the middle of the growing season. This is important for leaving places for those bees to get in and lay their eggs and overwinter. And their eggs actually develop through the growing season. So cutting back to the ground at any time is actually not good for native bees. So cutting back is okay, but just make sure that you don't go lower than 8 to 24 inches. So thank you, everyone. Please take our pledge to rewild, and you can learn a lot more about all the different ways that you can rewild your own landscape. If you go to our website, I think Michael has provided that link, and it will come up at the end as well. And you'll get more resources for further reading and more, further reading on our website, as well as other books that have inspired us at Wild Seed Project. And I please encourage you to take a look at our website and see what you think. And if you can get involved in some way, that would be great. So I'll turn it over to George now.
Thank you very much, Anna. That was an awesome presentation.
Thank you.
Now that she's explained what to put in your yard and everything, I'm probably going to go over some different strategies of how to convince your landscaper how to go do it and how to save money while maybe integrating some of those strategies too. So my name is George Carrette. I'm the founder of EcoQuiet Lawn Care. I founded it back in 2014. At least the entity was George's Wicken Lawn and Garden then, and I quickly changed that name. And what's different about us is we try to go and minimize the damage of lawn care as much as possible. So we have electric mowers, electric blowers, and though we encourage people to go and do a lot of these strategies, we also want to try to mitigate the damage of people that want land scraping and try to be the lesser of two evils in some ways, because gas lawn care pollutes a huge amount. So next slide. So there's some important steps to go and do when you're trying to make your yard more eco-friendly and easier and cheaper to maintain. You change your approach to leaf cleanup. reduce and maintain areas, and alter landscape design. And then I'll go and wrap this up and present the actual ideas in a way that can get people to change. Because sometimes I know a lot of other landscaping companies are very set in their ways. So I'll go and tell you how to be diplomatic in those situations. Next time. So leaf cleanups and electric leaf blowers are really the only thing that can be kind of difficult. And with that, there's actually a good relationship with the eco-friendly methods that Anna was talking about. If you maintain less areas, then you don't need to have more money to go and more time to deal with these less powerful leaf blowers. So I'm going to go over some other strategies like the leaf corral, which is exactly what she talked about, building up these areas where you keep leaves on the property and you don't use something like a gas leaf sucker, which you probably heard in your neighborhoods, making a huge amount of noise and grinding up those leaves only to truck them off to a composting site, which I don't think is very bug friendly. Certainly not. And yeah, so also with that, it's just you want to leave most leaves, like she said, for the mulch, because it's really not necessary to blow all the leaves out of your vinca or your pachysandra. And a lot of times when I'm actually going and doing that, I see their leaves flowing off and I'm feeling like I'm destroying more than I'm just cleaning up. So next slide. So yeah, there's other things that make leaf cleanup a lot more easy. One is going and planting, like I said, the ground cover. It's really nice when you have areas that you can just lightly rake off the sticks and still present a really nice clean area. And a lot of times those leaves in there degrade and enrich your soil and get the ground cover going better. And it's a lot less expensive. I have spent so much time blowing out ground cover, especially if it's wet or anything like that. It's just a massive time suck to get everything perfect. And it's really unnecessary, and you could just not do it, and your landscaper will probably be more than happy to go and take that labor savings and pass it on to you. Another one is actually just doing proper pruning. You can probably convince your landscaper to go do that in the winter. And a lot of times what you can do is upbranch shrubs like yews or maybe privet, just removing some of the dead branches so you can get an electric leaf blower in there better and blow out the leaves if you're going to do that. And when you can actually go do that, then you can get a much more efficient cleanup. Yeah, and then the last one is just kind of maintain a borderland around, and this is more related to the not maintaining every single part of your property. A lot of times you can just go and slightly nudge over some leaves into your wooded areas, and then you don't make this huge pile of leaves, and it's really, really simple to keep your grass clean. And at the same time, it saves so much time for us when we're out there going and blowing leaves. Next slide. Another one is just maintaining prairie lands and putting in native shrubbery, because a lot of these plants really tolerate and like having large amounts of leaves. And if you design your landscape correctly, it's not an eyesore, and it seems like you're doing it on purpose. Especially because I have one client that does it in a little bit of a messy way, and it definitely, they go and talk about it around the neighborhood and everything. But I have another client that puts in a lot of different species into their lawn, and even though they never mow it, it actually looks quite nice. Yeah, and yet again, if you're not mowing all the time, maybe you mow it once a year or just trying to maintain a little bit for the ticks, then you're going to be saving a lot of money around that. It's pretty simple. Next slide. And another thing you could do is just surrender a lot of your landscaping to woodland, planting ground cover like mayapple, bunchberry, and trillium that not only withstand the leaf fall, they really love it. And like I said, those are generally native. So basically you're going and providing some actual habitat and restoring the understory. Especially because I see a lot of our woods around here, the understory a lot of times just isn't the same as when you go up to into the White Mountains or anything like that. It's mostly a lot of invasives, glossy buckthorn, Japanese knotweed. So I don't know if it's to do with the over farming, but if you can go and be a curator of a natural understory and bring it back, then you'll feel good, and also you'll save money on not blowing out those leaves. Next slide. So there's some plants that really go and get me pretty good when people are looking for the more perfectionistic landscaping. So one is just spirea. A lot of people use the hybrid varieties, and from what I know, it's a good pollinator and everything, but a lot of people want me to pick out every single leaf out of them. And especially with electric leaf blowers, it just doesn't work that well. And not only that, you're spending like all this time blowing out the mulch, blowing out all the soil material, when all this plant is going to do is leaf out, and then you won't be able to see anything. So really, it's about being patient and not going out there and really freaking out if you see a couple of leaves. And another interesting thing you could go and do, and this has more to do with weeding and also, yet again, dropping leaves, is use a couple more evergreens in your landscape. They look good all winter. They don't drop their leaves as much, so you don't have to go and leaf blow them as much. And a lot of them, like Abrophyte or Eastern White Cedar, they tend to slightly acidify the soil around them, which has a really kind of cool effect that I generally don't have to do a huge amount of weeding and other types of maintenance around them. So at that point, you know, those people that would alternatively use herbicide or something like that to go and kill that stuff off, you don't have to. And the dropped needles of it almost kind of produce their own mulch in a lot of scenarios. And it's pretty well kept. It almost looks like leaf mulch. So if you're not willing to go to a deciduous leaf mulch, it could be a good alternative. Next slide. So another issue that can affect a lot of different plantings is using plants in decline. In particular, a lot of people want me to use hemlocks, and I just feel like until we find a good biocontrol insect to offset the hemlock woolly adelgid, that it's probably not a great idea. Because if you go and buy a treatment program from a lot of tree services, you might be using imidacloprid, you might be using other soil drenches that go and are used to kill off the woolly adelgid. But that also creates other problems with scale and other things. And it might be simpler to use something like an Eastern White Cedar that doesn't really have the same amount of problems. And also planting things according to the environment. I have so many clients that just refuse to acknowledge that they have deer in their yard, and then they go plant a bunch of rhododendrons, and they become rhododendrons, and they completely get upbranched by everything. And then they want me to replant. And as you can kind of tell, as Anna was talking about, those plants could be there could be pesticide all over them. So you really want to just go and plant once, plant the right thing. Maybe instead of rhododendron in that scenario, plant some pieris or something that just doesn't have those same effects, but it actually does the same thing. If you have a lot of deer, another thing could be if you're trying to plant a lot of tulips, maybe plant daffodils, and just make your whole area just so those pests that you have in the local area are handled by what plants you put there, not by chemicals or large amounts of money, which you also don't want to deal with. Next slide. So this is something that I've been involved with a lot, especially with electric leaf blowers, is how to be diplomatic with your landscaper to change, because a lot of landscapers, especially the larger companies, have been doing it a certain way for a long time and maybe won't see the value because maybe their quoting methods don't really pertain to what you're doing. And so one thing you might want to go and consider doing is doing 1 year and saying to them, okay, I just want to try this. I won't go and say you need to decrease your price now because it is slightly different. But if you go and work with them and have that first year where you're going and saying, hey, try this, then maybe they see, oh, my labor costs are lower. And once they see that being better for them, there could be a chance that they could lower your price and also maybe increase their margin. So you really have to sell it as a win-win. If you see a little bit better of a margin, they'll definitely want to do it because it's just a different type of business model. And also, especially with the leaf blowers in general, a lot of people are passionate about this and can get angry at their landscaper if they're doing it a certain way. And I've noticed that that just kind of pushes the landscapers into wanting to do the opposite of what you want. So it's really important to be a friend to your landscaper and convince them that way, rather than getting over emotional about this and then kind of pushing them to do the opposite. For instance, in Newton, they put a leaf blower, gas leaf blower ban with a limitation of about 65 decibels, which made it basically illegal to use almost any gas leaf blower except for a 4-stroke. And a lot of those landscapers, one, they didn't listen to the law, and two, a lot of them that I talked to said, because of this, I will never use electric leaf blowers. And that's definitely what I don't want to see, is people going out there and, creating blowback, no pun intended. Yeah. So once people start doing this and there is more competition, you'll see more and more people. Like, I've always tried to be a helpful hand with at least the electric aspects and telling people how my methods are. And I've gotten people to buy, electric hedge trimmers, start buying some electric blowers, or just get interested in it. And that's the thing. Rome wasn't built in one day, and by little bit, people get more interested and people will adapt to this if the clients want it, are willing to be patient and encouraging to their landscaping company. And if not, because this could happen, find another one and let the free market do what it does best. So, yeah. Thank you.
Great, thank you, George. That was great. I learned so much, and there's a couple of questions here. Let me just get everyone back. Remind everyone to put their questions into the chat box. And well, let's see, I'll add myself in there as well so we can have a nice panel here. And thank you, Anna, as well. Let's see, are you able to unmute yourself? Anna, there we go. All right, great. There are a ton of questions here. And what's great, we have a lot of very informed listeners as well who've been able to answer some of them for some of the questions that came up. So let's go through suggestions for planning over septic systems in a rural area. Anna?
Yeah, you can plant a lot of things over septic systems. The main thing you want to be careful of is just not planting any really deep-rooted plants. Like I wouldn't plant a weeping willow because those are known to, reach for water sources. And I'd say other species of willows like black willow, which is our native willow that becomes a big tree, probably don't plant that. But you can plant more shallow rooted shrubs, like some suckering shrubs, like flowering raspberry. You can plant a lot of nice meadow species. Anything that does well in more sandy soils, well-drained soils that can dry out from time to time because leach fields are very sandy so that things go down. So yeah, that's the main thing. And I would kind of think about, if there's a lot of open space, dry sun-loving plants.
Great. George, you mentioned upbranching a few times. Can you explain what that is?
So upbranching is basically when you take something like a yew hedge and you just go to the under part of it and you start removing a lot of dead wood, a lot of wood that isn't really going to produce much life. And that just makes it a lot easier for me with my electric leaf blowers that are more eco-friendly, but probably about 60 to 70% of the power to actually get the same job done. Now, alternatively, if you have a hedge and there's leaves under there and you want to maintain look, you could just blow out around it. You don't have to get all the leaves under there. There ain't hurting anything, and it's a costly thing. So if you don't want to have the expense to upbranch, which can look quite good. I mean, if you look at kind of old growth yews and you see their kind of skeletal structure, it is really beautiful. But at the same time, if you have a yew hedge, I'd say just stop caring about something you don't see, and then your whole solution is solved.
Great, thank you. Anna, are non-fruiting cherries beneficial to insects as fruit producing?
Well, all cherries produce fruits. So even though our native cherries, like there's 3 really great native cherries that are more common. The pin cherry or fire cherry that grows in kind of disturbed hot, dry habitats. There's wild cherry or black cherry, which is more of a nice, beautiful tree that grows in forests, deciduous forests. That actually, those cherries can be very tasty. And then the choke cherry, which is a little bit more shrub-like, kind of between a shrub and a tree. They all produce cherries. They're just a little bit smaller. Some of them are a little bit more bitter, depending on the individual plant, from plant to plant. And some are better tasting than others. But wildlife love them, even if they're maybe not as great for us to eat as the cultivated cherries. So yes, they all produce really nutritious, important cherries.
Right, George, what should you do if you already have an eastern hemlock that has woolly adelgids? What are the best options?
So that's a tough one. I mean, thankfully, they are trying to introduce a biocontrol from, I believe, China. And so I would keep posted about that. That's the best solution to any problem, because really the alternative is getting on a treatment program. It's really about increasing the health of the tree by fertilizing it correctly, and also spraying if there's a big problem, horticultural oil or neem oil, because the alternative is pretty bad for the environment. It's the use of imidacloprid, and you can get a slightly better thing is maybe not using a soil drench, use instead of a trunk injection. But the problem is, even with those, that you're probably going to look into a secondary outbreak of scale or aphids. So I don't have a really great solution for you with that, but really what you have to do is increase the health of it. You can also remove some of the lower branches because, like Anna was saying, a lot of these insects like to overwinter in the actual leaf or the understory. And by actually upbranching it like that, you're actually disrupting their life cycle. So anything touching the ground could be that little bit of growth that actually gets the woolly adelgid first, and then it can spread from there. So one thing you do, don't try to manipulate it into a hedge, keep it in as a natural tree, remove weak growth, and pray that people figure out that biocontrol.
Let's get your perspective, both of you, on this one. We'll start with Anna. There's a number of questions and comments related to concerns about ticks. And is there an increase if you've got wildflowers or meadows? Is that true versus grass or tall grass? There were some comments about borders helping to protect to the lawn. Any additional suggestions?
Definitely. So I think it makes sense that ticks are really on all of our minds because of Lyme disease and other infections as well. And deer ticks are the culprit for Lyme disease, but we get dog ticks as well, which could carry other diseases. So it's a tricky subject, but basically having more native vegetation, it's not creating more opportunities for ticks to reproduce and thrive. It's really just, it's places that ticks will be. And if you want to think about eliminating ticks, start by thinking about kind of interrupting the ways that ticks are carried through the landscape. So the white-footed mouse and the white-tailed deer are some of the main vectors for ticks. Ticks feed on mammals, and we're another mammal that ticks like. So we have an explosion of deer populations in the Northeast because it's a long story, but they've lost their predator, the wolf. And we've also kind of narrowed them into smaller and smaller fragments of habitat because of our developed landscapes. And we are the people who could the things that can be their main predator now. So I think if you can, there's a lot of local movements to ban deer culls, and I think if we can think about restoring that balance by maybe doing some deer hunting is not necessarily a bad thing. And then restoring more ecosystem balance by providing more opportunities with native plants for a diversity of mammals to thrive. Predators of the white-footed mouse and animals like possums that eat ticks are really great places to start. And we can't necessarily do that individually in our own yards, but in our own yards, we can kind of mitigate our risks just by doing things like instead of having narrow paths with vegetation that's coming close to you, maybe have your paths be like 3 feet wide, a wide mowed path. And so that you're not spending the majority of your time during the prime tick season, May through June, in contact with close vegetation, because ticks will fall onto you from close vegetation, but they're not kind of being conveyed through the landscape by vegetation and completing their life cycles that way. It's really the mammals that are doing that. So that's how I look at it, and just being very, very vigilant. I think we all have resources we can look to for ways to check for ticks and keep ticks off of us.
Great. George, your perspective.
Yeah, I'll second the hunting thing. I'm actually a hunter myself, and it is really true that a lot of people are afraid of like coyotes, and a lot of people push out the predators that are actually there. And that's one reason I do hunt, is because then it's up to me. Like, I will never hunt a predator. I will never hunt a coyote. It's not what we need. And I think it's getting rid of the stigma of hunting, or maybe even allowing a hunter, if you have the proper square footage to legally hunt in your area, could be a way to possibly reduce the amount of ticks that are going onto your yard. That's not possible for everybody. You know, I think it's you need about 150 feet or yards away from any household to legally bow hunt anywhere, so it can be quite limiting. Another thing you can do is plant some plants that maybe deer don't like. I don't think it's a native, but catmint is one thing that has a lot of fragrance, and they tend not to like it. And so they'll tend to avoid it because though it smells great to us, it's bothersome to them. So these fragrant plants can also help push them away. You could also create a wood chip border. I think around 4 feet of wood chips will kind of help prevent ticks from crawling into your yard. And then, like Anna said, you still have these maintained areas that if you maintain, you probably won't have any ticks in there unless there's animals dropping them in there. So that's what I'd probably do. I know there's a lot of other treatments, like a lot of people throw out cedar oil. I tend not to like to spray stuff all the time because it seems like a Sisyphean task. I'm much more into going and planting things according to what pest you have. We have a lot of vole issues, so that's why I like planting narcissus. Stops people from poisoning them. And if you create that border, I've had success with it. I haven't done it for that long, but the places that I have done it have actually worked, and I want to keep doing it.
Great, thank you. Anna, are dandelions considered invasive? Am I allowed to kill them, and what's the best way?
No, dandelions are not considered invasive. You have to check off a number of criteria for a plant to be considered invasive. And it include it's not, I'm not going to be comprehensive, but it includes that the plant, it pushes out native plants in an area that maybe once had native plants. It has a variety of reproductive strategies, so it has kind of a leg up a lot on a lot of the native plants, et cetera, et cetera. And dandelion does not tick off those criteria. So it's a naturalized plant, and it's from Europe. And it's actually a cultivated plant in Italy. Italians have cultivated a number of varieties of dandelion because their leaves are a really great digestive bitter. And so this is the time of year, well, actually right before they start flowering is the time of year to eat them, but not in a pesticide and fertilized lawn, ridden lawn. You need to, if you don't use fertilizers, you can eat the dandelions from, and pesticides, you can eat the dandelions from your lawn. And you can make dandelion fritters with the flowers. Those are ways to get rid of them. But it's okay to accept a certain amount. I think, they're common yellow plants. They do seed around, but they're not that hard to get rid of. When you're weeding dandelion out of a garden bed, use a deep garden knife or hori to get the root. But and mow, maybe if you really don't want dandelions in your yard, mow when they're flowering instead of when they're going to seed, because mowing when they're going to seed will just disperse their seeds. So dandelions are not bad plants. They have deep taproot, so they actually bring a lot of nutrients up from the soil. Oftentimes, a lot of the weedy plants in your yard are indicators that the soil is poor and that it's kind of a ravaged soil. So it's an indicator that maybe if you want to grow richer loving plants, that it needs to have more organic matter, and maybe it's compacted, things like that. So dandelions are tough plants, and they have medicine and food for us. So no reason to get rid of them altogether.
All right.
And provide pollinator opportunities too, I might say.
Great. George, maybe you can answer this one first. What can you grow under an oak tree? What should you do under an oak tree? Because grass don't grow there.
Yeah, I mean, one thing you can go into is kind of have a moss lawn. I've had good success with that. Some people actually want me to go and establish moss lawns, and moss grows where it wants to. There's some short fescues and other things like that that will grow in a decent amount of shade, but grass won't grow everywhere. It's like a prairie plant. It's not something that wants to grow there, and a lot of people fertilize and just refuse to accept it, won't do it. But like I said, moss lawns, they're no maintenance. You never have to fertilize them. You never have to mow them, and it will just grow there itself. So I'm a big fan of moss, and it will grow where nothing else will, because a lot of times oaks can suck a lot of water out, and obviously you have a lot of shade. So, you know, you could also go and plant more garden beds around there, reduce the amount of the, you know, kind of maintained areas like that. For instance, I have a complete oak lot. There's not almost any grass on my property. And so what we do is we absolutely fill it with asters, hostas. I'd say about 95% of my yard is garden bed. And we have those other maintained paths that we go and use, but I'm not a fan of forcing things that don't need to be there. I know Vinca and other ground covers do pretty well in shade too, but it's not something that's incredibly high tread. But it's likewise with moss too. So.
Right. Anna, I think Anne here, I think instead of leave the leaves, I think she's looking to leave the snow, because she's asking what stands up to piled snow next to driveways?
That can be tricky because it depends on like your driveway material for one, because if you have pavement, then the snowplow is not pushing other materials, maybe besides some salt, onto that area where it's piling up the snow. And so as long as plants can handle heavier loads and salt, like I wouldn't plant shrubs in those areas, delicate shrubs, unless they're like very vigorous suckering shrubs that you can cut back and then they can resprout each year. But I would go with something perennial that can handle some salt. So let's see, seaside goldenrod is a really nice one. And let's see, I even in a shadier spot, big leafed aster can handle a little bit of salt and higher pH. So if you have concrete nearby, then you can plant big leaf aster. So those are a couple kind of plants that can act kind of like ground covers for those kinds of spots. But if you have like a gravel driveway and you're getting material pushed onto those plants, it's best to not plant really anything there, and just make sure you've designed your property so that you're allowing for where the snow is going to be pushed.
Great. Are there any mosquito repelling plants?
I don't think so. Not that I know of. I mean, there's citronella, but that's not a native plant. But I think the main thing is to not have standing water. So, you know, if you have a pond, I mean, there are some things that you can do to prevent the mosquitoes. And maybe George has more ideas about that, because you might have more experience with homeowners.
Yeah, I don't do that much, but one thing that you can do that's an eco-friendly product for large bodies around you is BT donuts. So it's Bacillus thuringiensis, and it's something that's pretty targeted towards mosquitoes, and you can throw these donuts into those areas, and then it creates a natural ecosystem that they start eating up the larvae. And yeah, that's one thing you could do. I haven't really had any luck with planting things to actually go and repel them. I think it's like I said, it's just go attack any water that has maybe like them in it. And besides that, I haven't even found a lot of the chemical sprays that people go and apply to be that effective. Mosquitoes are where they are in a large part, and so get a screened in porch.
Another thing I just thought of too, that is, I don't remember what it's called, but there is like a something that kills mosquitoes that you can just pick up at the hardware store. But don't put it into your pond or natural water body. Put it into like a 5-gallon bucket with some water in it, and that will attract the mosquitoes to it in your area and kill them. And it won't get out. So it's a smaller area that you're not allowing into the water body. I don't know exactly if it's bad for, what do you do when you get rid of that water? I'm not sure if it's necessarily a complete solution, but I've heard about that. So disposing of that properly would be an important thing to look into.
I'm always willing to try something for that. So if you can find out what that product was and pass that along to me, I'll pass it along. George, I have bought into the Steel battery operated system. I've been very pleased with it. I'll throw a plug in for our local hardware store, Greens, which both sells it and services it. What recommendations do you have for the homeowner for different battery operated or electric systems?
So the first recommendation I suggest is look over their entire tool platform, because once you start buying the batteries, you're going to kind of be married to it. For instance, I know Ego has a 2-stage snow blower that's electric. They have pretty good chainsaws, and overall they're pretty cheap and economical. I know Stihl has probably the most complete variety of tools. You can even get a concrete cutter right there. And so that's a pretty unique one. They have different mowers, they have different weed whackers, different types of chainsaws. I think they have like 6 or 7 different types of chainsaws, from like top handle arborist chainsaws to, just straight 16-inch bar chainsaws that are pretty good. And also there's another company, Husqvarna, that is, I think, definitely more of a professional grade. Stihl and Husqvarna both have different platforms, but I know Husqvarna, I think, is a little bit more professional grade. But so it's just really look at all the different ones you have. If you need a really powerful leaf blower, then I would probably say go with Ego or Stihl. If you need a really quiet leaf blower, then it would probably be Stihl or Husqvarna. And just look at all the stats there. You'll see the decibels, you'll see how many Newton meters they have. And yeah, it's a little tough because especially it's a very new industry. So not everything there is completely easy to see what is better, what is not. There's not that many people that experience. I know when I go and talk to a sales rep, sometimes I generally know more about these tools than they do, because I put more hours behind them. So yeah, but that's the easy thing. Just look at the whole platform before you start buying, because if you get 10 different batteries, you're going to spend a lot of money and have a lot of different chargers, and that's a pain.
That's great. Thank you. So we will wrap it up there. There were a few other questions. I do see someone put in the mosquito dunk into the chat, and so I'll include that later. Let me just remind everyone that up and coming on the Wellesley NRC Natural Resources Commission website, there's a number of opportunities coming up and activities over the next month or so, from Petals to Petals, a garden tour, a milkweed sale, citizen science activities, and more. So you can find the links to that also on, let me bring it up one more time, our website. So Wellesley Conservation Land Trust, then the More menu, then the resources and native plants, and all of the previous sessions like this that we've had, that relate to native plants, we have on this site, so you can get them off of YouTube directly, starting with Cricket Vlas's heavily loved site, and presentation back in February, and then Doug Talame and more. This one will show up before the end of the evening as well. a recording to this, as well as all the links I've posted before. You can find here or will be on there before tomorrow. And then we'll send out an email blast here in the next couple of days. So with that, let me stop sharing one more time. I think, did we get it? Stop sharing. There we go. So Anna, thank you very much. There were many compliments to you for your work at Native Plant Trust, as well as what you're doing now. And George, you opened up our eyes, and I think you are increasing demand both for your services and the industry in general in turning the corner. So thank you very much, both of you. I want to wish everyone a very good evening. Take care.
Hi, thank you.